Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. As I've always said, this will be kind of my introductory. Today, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the studying of deviance, essentially looking at the how do you go about studying thing, right? Mentality. I'm excited to go through this with you. So there are many different ways to research deviance, just as we research other social phenomena, right? There's always ways to do things. Most importantly, the research method should be dictated by who and what you are trying to study, essentially, right? So we need to use different approaches to do so. So there's various types of research. Let's examine this in closer detail. There are a few main types of research that are used for studying deviance and crime. If researchers are studying something, you have to have a typology or a type, right? If a researcher studies crime, for example, official statistics may be the way to go. One can search organizational databases that are already collecting information, such as the FBI or the Federal Bureau of Investigation, right? The research question and what you want to examine needs to be answered with the statistics that the organization collects. If research goal is to find opinions about types of deviant behavior, researcher could design their own study or interviews and collect data by having people answer subjective questions about the topic, right? This is always a big deal. But there are more ways than just this, right? So we can use a secondary such as the FBI. We can create our own surveys that have subjective nature questions in nature. If studying a group of people, so let's say human traffickers, you would likely not be able to find official statistics or have them stop and take a survey. There is no database on all human traffickers. So you need to be able to find people to study, and likely or through informants will likely be doing the field research. Oftentimes, this is the case when studying different types of deviant behavior because the people doing deviant acts might not be easy to locate and may not be able to be labeled for their activities. That could even be criminal, right? These are some of the strengths and weaknesses of doing any type of research, and knowing which method will work best for research questions is the key to developing a good study. Cost, time, approach, generalizability, and accuracy are all important to consider when conducting social research on deviance and crime. So as this previous slide I just went past, and I'm going to, right, you have official statistics, surveys and interviews, field research, and then you started looking at the idea of what are some of these strengths and weaknesses, as I was just alluding to, right? So field research, let's start with that. It doesn't cost much, but it takes a lot of time to find participants, build rapport, and observe for long enough to get enough data, longitudinal studies, right? You can also generalize the findings to a larger population since you only studied a small subset and is largely subjective based on your own observations. So you can't generalize in that case, I should say. Survey research is expensive, very expensive as someone who worked in market research world, right? And takes a bit of time to develop and administer through the mail, internet, phone, survey panels, or in person, right? Programs like Qualtrics. This approach is objective, but participants' answers are subjective. So the accuracy may need to be considered. If you know how many times a person has done an illegal act, they may not self-report the real number, right? How many times did you get a ticket this year? You're going to be the real answer, or you're going to be the one you want, right? That's the big issue. I used to say in my intro classes, raise your hand if you think you're a good driver. Now, raise your hand if you've had more than 4 or 5 traffic violations in the year. It's operational definition. It's how you ask the question, right? Because people fear getting in trouble. With a random sample, you can generalize to a larger population, though. Okay, so official statistics are usually free, and the time to collect the data is short as it has already been compiled for you, right? You can also generalize your findings to a larger populations, but with already completed data, you are stuck with the statistics that are collected, thus giving you a little bit of less range, right? You can confound them, compare them, but it's still there, right? Your research question may not fully answer the statistics that were collected in a way that doesn't perfectly fit what you're looking at. Plus, there is an issue of unreported or unrecognized crimes. This is a big deal. Those who won't be a part of official records, so you won't know the real numbers of crimes committed, such as rape, because people don't disclose this, right? So ethics play a big role in the type of research, especially when we study people who may be the victims of crimes. There are a few big ethical considerations to make when we start looking at social research, right? So these are some of the facts here, right? Field research, lower cost, big time consuming, can and cannot generalize to larger populations. Surveys expensive, time-consuming, but objective results that can be generalizable. Official statistics, cheap, fast, generalizable, but data may not match your research question. So let's get into some research ethics. First things first, I'm the realist, not just kidding. First things first, the participants must not be forced to take a study and must give information consent, understanding any risks. This is a big deal. Milgram, Zimbardo, look up those names if you don't know. The researchers must mitigate any harm to the subjects. Anonymity and confidentiality must be upheld. Anyone who is studied must have their identity protected. Oh, this is so important because you need to make sure that you're not exposing people or spoiling someone's identity. Anonymity, if you're not referring to hearing that, refers to when even the researcher cannot know who the participants are. So if a survey does not collect data with names, the survey answers, the research is anonymous. Confidentiality is when a researcher knows the participants' identities, but does not share it, such as when conducting interviews or field research where the researcher gets to know their informants, right? If a study must use deception, it needs to be justified, and the researcher is required to debrief people after they are deceived for the purpose of the study. This is a huge issue if you want to look deeper into the Milgram experiment. That's a big example of why this exists behind IRBs. The researcher must be honest about their findings and the ways that they conducted the research. Researchers are now subject to having their proposals reviewed by international institutional review boards, otherwise known as IRBs, or approval based on ethical considerations of research design. Before IRBs were instituted, and even now, we have examples of social research that breaks ethics, especially when it comes to studying deviant communities. Now we're going to talk about one that's a little bit controversial in the sociological world. So bear with me here while we disclose some realities behind us. I'm not just going to take shots at Milgram. I'm going to talk about a sociologist here. So Humphrey, this is a really good example. In the late 1960s, Loud Humphrey studied homosexual behavior in public restrooms using participant observation fieldwork. In order to obtain his data, he lied to the participants by telling them he was a voyeur. And he often played the role of the watch queen, looking for the police and others, right? He then traced the bathroom participants to their homes later, pretending to doing research on families, and interviewed the households under false pretenses. I can't express how much this is bad. False pretenses. He found out that most of the men who were living as heterosexual with wives and children, which was groundbreaking when the study came out in 1970, right? He found out that most of them who were also interacting in these homosexual activities during the beginning of the gay liberation movement. However, the way that Humphreys collected data has many ethical concerns and would likely not pass an IRB today. One of which is that he actually would get their license plate through a connection he had with the police. Imagine what happens in a time where being in the closet wasn't even barely possible. Imagine if your whole family found out that you had been on the down low, for better lack of terms, and it was because the researcher tried to gain objective data by taking advantage of your situation. Thus, you see the importance behind not violating these rules. Now, I am a huge Erving Goffman fan, so this one hurts me a bit, but it is a great example of when the people who were originally part of the most powerful families of sociology, or he's a founder, right, go into here. So let's talk about Alice Goffman. Alice Goffman is the daughter of the famous sociologist and one of the founders, Erving Goffman, who we will later study in this course with his seminal work on the idea of stigma management. For her sociological dissertation, when she was obtaining her PhD, which later turned into a book, On the Run, Alice Goffman conducted field research and ethnography, where she moved to a mixed-income Black community to study how young men there were treated as criminals by police and often faced police brutality. In her book, Goffman describes her own involvement in what could be a crime being the drive away. Being the person who drives away. I'm sorry, keep stuttering here. The getaway car, essentially vehicle during the attempted murder. The description of the possible breaches give us contemporary example of a reminder of ethical issues involved when studying deviance and crime with the onset of more safeguards in place. In conclusion, even conducting social research on deviance is exciting, interesting, and involves careful attention to the ethics. There are different methods. There are different for designing research, collecting data, each with their own strengths and weaknesses. And it's important to follow the method that helps to answer the research questions, just like Loud Humphrey, just like Alice Goffman, who later tried to hide her findings if she had violated any ethical rules. We have to place ourselves in the participant's situation, because the reality is, if we don't, then we can be breaking our own guidelines, rules, and expectations, right? So in summary, conducting research on deviance involves careful attention to ethics, facts. That is just it right there. You cannot leave any crumbs left there. You have to follow the rules, right? Different methods for designing research with strength and weakness. Depending how you want to conduct it, it has benefits, it has cons, right? Important to choose the method that will allow research questions to be answered, but making sure you're doing so ethically. So I encourage you to keep learning. Again, these are just some TLDRs to give you kind of a quick breakdown of what we're talking about in these chapters. They're not meant to be encyclopedic. They're meant to be kind of a quick point of reference for you. Look forward to seeing you in the next one, and make sure to continue your readings and posting on Yellow Dig. Thank you.